I found her diary 3 weeks ago. It was in a cardboard box at an estate auction in White Plains, buried beneath yellowed newspaper clippings and moth-eaten table linens that no one wanted. The auctioneer had lumped it in with Lot 47, miscellaneous paper goods and household items, and I was the only bidder. Paid $12 for the whole box. $12 for what turned out to be the last testament of Catherine Eleanor Ashworth, written in her own hand, dated December 1925. I'm a collector, you see, not of valuable things necessarily, but of stories, the kind that get forgotten, the kind that families hide in attics and basements, that end up in estate sales when the last person who remembers is gone. I buy boxes of old letters and journals and photographs, and I piece together the lives of people who thought their stories would die with them. But Catherine's story was different. I knew it the moment I opened that leather-bound diary and read the first line. I can still hear my mother's voice that night, trembling as she said the word I'd been begging for all week. Yes. The handwriting was elegant, the kind they don't teach anymore, all loops and careful strokes. But there was something else in those words, something that made my hands shake as I turned the pages. Urgency, fear, the voice of the young woman who knew she was writing something that mattered, that needed to be preserved, even if she never intended anyone to read it. The diary ended abruptly on December 6, 1925. The last entry was just 2 words, written in ink so dark it looked like it had been pressed into the paper with a trembling hand. Mother knew. I spent 3 weeks researching Catherine Eleanor Ashworth. Birth records, social registers, newspaper archives, census data. I found her birth certificate, November 3, 1906. I found her father's business records, James Ashworth, steel magnate, self-made man who built an empire from nothing. I found society page mentions of the family moving from Brooklyn to a limestone mansion on East 73rd Street in 1924. But after December 1925, Catherine Ashworth disappeared from the public record entirely. No marriage announcement, no death certificate, no society page mentions, nothing, as if she'd simply ceased to exist, or as if someone had very carefully erased her from history. The only clue I found was a brief mention in the January 12, 1926 edition of the New York Times, buried on page 14. The family of Mr. James Ashworth of East 73rd Street announces that their daughter, Miss Catherine Ashworth, has retired from society due to ill health and will be residing abroad indefinitely. Ill health. The Victorian euphemism for everything from tuberculosis to pregnancy to madness to simply being an inconvenience. I kept digging. Found her mother's death certificate. Elizabeth Ashworth, died March 1926. Cause of death listed as heart failure. She was 42 years old. I found her father's obituary from 1932. Made no mention of a daughter. Just said he was survived by no immediate family.
Catherine had been erased. Deliberately, methodically, completely. But she'd left this diary, and in it, she'd written the truth about what happened on December 5, 1925, at a party in a Manhattan mansion. A party she should never have gone to. A party that destroyed her, her mother, and every naive belief she'd ever held about the glittering world she so desperately wanted to join. What you're about to hear is Catherine's story, told in her own words where possible, supplemented by historical research where necessary. I've verified every detail I could, the addresses, the dates, the social context, the people involved. I've walked the streets she walked, stood outside the buildings where these events unfolded, tried to understand the world she lived in. This is the story of a 19-year-old girl who received an invitation she couldn't refuse, who begged her mother for permission to attend a party that would change everything, who wore a cream silk dress and walked into a trap so carefully constructed that she didn't even know she was caught until it was too late. This is the story of a mother's worst fear coming true, of a father's ambition destroying his only child, of a society so corrupt and calculating that they turned young women into commodities and called it civilization. This is the story Catherine Ashworth wrote in her diary, night after night, trying to make sense of what happened to her, trying to warn someone, anyone, about what really goes on behind the closed doors of Manhattan's finest homes. My name is James Mitchell, and I've spent 30 years collecting forgotten stories. But Catherine's story, this one haunts me, because somewhere in the pages of her diary, between the elegant handwriting and the carefully chosen words, I can hear her screaming, silently, the way women of her class were taught to scream. Let me tell you about November 1925. Let me tell you about a girl who wanted nothing more than to belong. Let me tell you about the last party Catherine Eleanor Ashworth should have gone to.
Catherine's diary began on November 14th, 1925, but not with the party. It began with a description of her life, as if she needed to establish who she was before she could explain what happened to her. I'll share it with you in her own words. I live in a house on East 73rd Street that feels like a costume. Father bought it 18 months ago. White limestone, brass fixtures, trying desperately to look like it's been here for generations, when in fact it still smells of fresh paint. Mother hates it. She never says so, but I can see it in the way she touches the furniture, tentative, as if afraid it might vanish. The house still stands, by the way. I've seen it. It's been converted into apartments now, but the limestone facade is the same. The brass fixtures still gleam in the sunlight. It's the kind of building that announces money before you even step inside. Catherine's father, James Ashworth, had built his fortune in steel. Started as a coal miner's son in Pennsylvania, worked his way up through sheer force of will and ruthless business acumen. And by 1925, he owned 3 steel mills and held contracts with half the railroad companies in America. He was worth, in today's money, approximately $80 million. But money, as Catherine was learning, wasn't the same as acceptance. She wrote, "Father says we've arrived, but Mother, who grew up poor and knows what it means to be looked through instead of at, she knows we're still just guests in their world, visitors who might be asked to leave at any moment." Catherine's mother, Elizabeth, was the daughter of a seamstress. She'd married James when she was 18 and he was 26, when he was just starting out, when they were both still poor. She'd watched him build his empire, watched him transform from a rough-spoken mill worker into a man who wore tailored suits and smoked Cuban cigars. But she'd never forgotten where they came from, never let herself believe that new money could buy what old money inherited, that sense of belonging, of unquestioned place in the world. Catherine herself was 19 in November 1925. By all accounts, she was beautiful. Dark hair, gray eyes, the kind of delicate features that photographed well in society pages. But more than that, she was educated. Her father had hired French and English governantesses to tutor her at home, hadn't allowed her to attend school because he didn't want her mixing with common children. She read voraciously, Wharton, Fitzgerald, anyone who wrote about the world she observed from a distance. And she was desperate. Desperate to belong. Desperate to be more than just the daughter of new money. Desperate to be invited, included, accepted by the families who'd been in New York since before America was America. On November 14th, 1925, she wrote, "I spend my afternoons reading in the morning room, which Father insists on calling that even though it faces west and catches no morning light. I read about people like the ones I watch from a distance, the ones Father is trying to buy our way into. I wonder if they know how much I envy them, how much I'd give to belong." 3 days later, she got her wish, or what she thought was her wish. The invitation arrived on November 17th. Catherine described it in detail. Cream-colored envelope, heavy as parchment, her name written in ink so black it looked wet. Hand-delivered, no stamp. Inside, a single card. Mrs. Helena Worthington requests the pleasure of Miss Catherine Eleanor Ashworth's company at a private gathering on the evening of December 5th, 1925, at 9 o'clock, 24 East 67th Street. Formal dress. Regrets only. I've researched Helena Worthington extensively. She was 58 years old in 1925, widow of Charles Worthington III, whose family had arrived in New Amsterdam in 1647. The Worthingtons had signed the Constitution, funded the Erie Canal, owned land that became half of Manhattan's financial district. But by the 1920s, like many old families, their fortune was mostly on paper, land and bonds and investments that looked impressive, but generated little actual cash. Helena Worthington was known for her careful social maneuvering. She'd maintained her family's position through strategic marriages, careful alliances, and an absolute understanding of how society worked. She gave parties that were written about in town and country. She sat on the boards of museums and hospitals. She decided who was accepted and who wasn't. And in November 1925, she invited Catherine Ashworth to her home. Catherine wrote, "I must have made some sound, a gasp, a cry, something, because Mother appeared in the doorway within seconds. She was wearing her afternoon dress, the dove gray wool, and her hair was coming loose from its pins the way it always did when she'd been worrying." What happened next, I've reconstructed from Catherine's diary entries and from what I know about family dynamics in that era, in that class. Catherine showed her mother the invitation, and Elizabeth Ashworth, who'd spent years watching her husband chase acceptance, who'd been 19 once herself and learned hard lessons about the price of ambition, she looked at that cream-colored card and felt afraid. Catherine recorded the conversation. Mother's fingers tightened on the invitation until the heavy paper crumpled slightly at the edges. "Has your father seen this?" she asked. "Father? Why would he? He's at the mill. He won't be home until 7. Mother, why do you look like that?" "Like what?" "Like someone died." Mother tried to smile. Failed. Set the invitation down on the side table as if it were something dangerous. "I don't trust these people, Catherine. They don't invite girls like you, girls like us, unless they want something." Girls like us. That phrase appears repeatedly in Catherine's diary over the next few days. It was the dividing line Elizabeth tried to draw, the boundary Catherine kept trying to cross. New money versus old, earned versus inherited, accepted versus tolerated. Catherine wrote that she argued with her mother, said the things 19-year-olds say when they think their parents don't understand, that times had changed, that father had made something of himself, that they weren't who they used to be. And Elizabeth, according to Catherine's account, said something that would haunt both of them. "We're exactly who we used to be, Kathy. We just have a bigger house now." But the conversation wasn't over, because James Ashworth came home at 7:30 that evening, and Catherine showed him the invitation, and his reaction was everything Elizabeth had feared it would be. Catherine wrote, "Father read it 3 times, his lips moving slightly with the words. When he looked up at me, his eyes were bright. 'Helena Worthington,' he said, and his voice had the same reverence some men reserve for speaking of God. 'She's invited you to her home.'"
I found James Ashworth's business papers in the New York Public Library archives. I've read his correspondence, his contracts, his carefully documented efforts to buy his way into society. He'd been donating to the right charities, buying tables at the right galas, investing in the failing businesses of the right families for 5 years. He saw Catherine's invitation as validation, proof that his strategy was working, that the Ashworths were finally being accepted. He didn't see it as the trap it was. Catherine recorded his words. "This is what I've been working toward. 5 years of donations, 5 years of buying tables at their damn charity balls, 5 years of taking their condescending smiles and their whispered jokes about new money, and now they're inviting you into their homes? Do you understand what this means?" "Yes, Mr. Ashworth, I understand what it meant. I understand exactly what it meant. But you didn't, and your daughter paid the price for your ambition." The argument between Catherine's parents happened that night, after Catherine had gone to bed. She didn't record it directly, she couldn't have heard it, but she wrote about finding her mother in her sitting room later, writing something in her careful hand, eyes red from crying. What Catherine did record was the conversation she had with her mother that night, and reading it now, knowing what I know about what happened later, it breaks my heart. "Tell me why you're so afraid," I said. Mother was quiet for a long moment. Then, "When I was 17, I was invited to a party. Not anything like this, just a gathering at the home of one of the women I sewed for. She said she wanted to introduce me to some people, said I had potential. Elizabeth told her daughter about being used as entertainment, about being presented to a wealthy man looking for a mistress, about refusing and being punished for it with 2 years of near starvation as her sewing clients mysteriously disappeared. Catherine wrote, "This is different," I said, but I didn't sound convinced even to myself. Mrs. Worthington is a businesswoman, Catherine. She doesn't do anything without a purpose, and when she invites the daughter of a steel magnate to her home, it's not because she thinks you're delightful company." But Elizabeth couldn't stop her daughter from going. James wanted Catherine at that party, saw it as essential to his plan, to their family's advancement. And Catherine herself wanted to go,
wanted it so desperately that she couldn't hear the warning in her mother's voice. So Elizabeth did what mothers do when they can't protect their children. She made Catherine promise to leave if anything felt wrong, to be home by midnight, and then she gave permission for something she knew in her bones was dangerous. Catherine wrote, "Mother squeezed my hand once, hard, then let go. Then go. Wear something beautiful. Dance with handsome boys. Be young and foolish. But remember that I love you more than your father loves the idea of us being accepted." That permission, that reluctant, fearful yes, would be the thing Elizabeth Ashworth regretted for the rest of her very short life. I wonder if you've ever given permission for something you knew was wrong, knew was dangerous, because the alternative was worse, because saying no would have caused a different kind of damage. Have you ever loved someone enough to let them make a terrible mistake, just so they could learn the lesson themselves? Tell me in the comments below, because I keep thinking about Elizabeth Ashworth, sitting in her room, writing in her journal, knowing her daughter was walking into something terrible and being powerless to stop it.
The next week, from November 18th through December 4th, Catherine's diary entries are filled with preparations. Dress fittings, shopping trips, conversations about what to wear and how to behave. But underneath the surface excitement, there's a current of anxiety that grows stronger with each passing day. On December 2nd, James Ashworth hired a car and driver to take Catherine and Elizabeth to Bergdorf Goodman. Catherine described it in detail, the new automobile still smelling of leather, her father's instructions to the driver to take Fifth Avenue so they'd be seen, her mother sitting in silence watching the city pass. She wrote, "Mother sat beside me, her gloved hands folded in her lap. It had snowed the night before, just enough to make Manhattan look clean. I tried to make conversation, tried to break the tension, but she just looked at me with eyes that had been crying and said, 'What would you like me to say? That I've changed my mind? That I think this is a wonderful idea?'" At Bergdorf Goodman, they were met by a sales assistant named Mrs. Pemberton. I found records of the purchase in the store's archives. They've kept meticulous records since 1899. The dress cost $350, which in today's money would be about $6,000, for a single dress, for one night. But it was, by Catherine's description, extraordinary. She wrote, "It was cream silk, the color of pearls, with a dropped waist and a hem that would fall just below my knees. The bodice was covered in tiny glass beads that caught the light. The back was cut low, daringly low, French, designed by Jean Lanvin. When I put it on, I barely recognized myself in the mirror." Jean Lanvin was one of the most famous designers in Paris in the 1920s. Her dresses were worn by everyone from Parisian actresses to American heiresses. The beadwork alone on a Lanvin gown could take months to complete. Catherine Ashworth, daughter of a coal miner's grandson, was wearing haute couture. But something happened at Bergdorf Goodman that day that Catherine almost didn't record. She mentioned it briefly, then crossed it out, then wrote it again in the margin as if she couldn't decide whether it was important. "We passed Margaret Lawrence in the salon. She was there for a fitting too. She looked up as we entered, recognized me immediately, our fathers do business together, and looked away without acknowledgement, as if I were furniture. Mother saw it too. I felt her hand tighten on my arm." Later, as we were leaving, I heard Margaret talking to Mrs. Pemberton. "I heard there will be at least 6 Worthington cousins there, all unmarried, all desperate. My mother says it's basically a marriage market, which is terribly mercenary, but at least we know what we're walking into." A marriage market. Those 2 words appear in Catherine's diary 3 times after that, each time underlined, as if she was trying to make sense of them, trying to understand what they meant. I've researched Margaret Lawrence. Her father, Thomas Lawrence, owned the New York Central Railroad and most of the rail lines between New York and Chicago. The Lawrences were old money, established society. Margaret married in 1926, I found the announcement in the Times, to Theodore Cartwright III, heir to a shipping fortune. It was considered an excellent match. Margaret knew what she was walking into, as she said. She knew the party was about marriages, about alliances, about combining old names with new money. She was prepared for it, expected it, accepted it as part of her role in society. But Catherine didn't know, or didn't want to know, or couldn't let herself believe it. She wrote, "In the automobile on the way home, neither of us spoke. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, trying to understand what I just learned. A marriage market. That's what Margaret Lawrence had called it. As if we were cattle being brought to auction, or paintings being hung for appraisal. When they got home,
Catherine confronted her mother, asked if she'd known. Elizabeth, according to Catherine's account, just said quietly, "I suspected." And when Catherine asked why she hadn't been told, Elizabeth said something that Catherine recorded word for word. "Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was just being bitter and small-minded, trying to ruin your excitement?" Elizabeth Ashworth understood her daughter well, because Catherine admitted in her diary that no, she wouldn't have believed her mother, would have thought she was being paranoid, would have gone to the party anyway, convinced that her mother didn't understand how modern the world had become. But now Catherine knew, and she had 4 days to decide what to do with that knowledge. She wrote on December 2nd, "I should cancel. I should send regrets. I should tell Father that I'm not going to be paraded in front of desperate aristocrats like a prize cow. But the dress is already altered. The shoes are already purchased. And more than that, more than the money or the preparation, I want to know. I want to see inside Helena Worthington's house. I want to understand how this world really works. I want to stop being a child who has things kept from her. Besides, I tell myself, I can just observe. I don't have to participate. I can go to the party, dance politely, make conversation, and come home by midnight, just as I promised Mother. I can see without being seen, watch without being watched. I can be careful." Oh, Catherine, reading those words now, knowing what I know, I want to reach back through time and shake you, tell you that you can't be careful in a room full of predators, that observation is participation, that just by walking through that door, you're already caught. But I can't warn her. No one can. She's been dead for decades, and all that's left is this diary, these words, this testament to innocence about to be destroyed. On December 3rd, the dress was delivered. Catherine tried it on one final time in her bedroom, and her mother came to help her with the buttons. She wrote, "Mother's hands shook as she fastened the silk-covered buttons. There were 32 of them, running from the dropped waist to the low back. Each one took time, patience, steady fingers. But her fingers weren't steady. 'Mother,' I said, watching her in the mirror, 'I'll be fine.' She didn't answer, just kept buttoning, one after another, as if each button was a prayer she was sending up to a God who might not be listening."
When she finished, she rested her hands on my shoulders, careful not to wrinkle the silk, and looked at me in the mirror. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "Promise me again. Promise me you'll leave if anything feels wrong." "I promise." "And promise me you'll be home by midnight." "Midnight. I promise." She kissed the top of my head, whispered something I couldn't quite hear. Then she left the room, and I stood alone in front of the mirror, wearing a dress that cost more than most families earned in a year, preparing to go to a party I increasingly suspected I shouldn't attend. The next 2 days, December 4th and 5th, are sparsely documented in Catherine's diary. Just a few scattered observations. She was nervous, having second thoughts, but also, underneath the fear, still excited, still hopeful, still believing that she could navigate this world if she was just smart enough, careful enough, aware enough. On the morning of December 5th, she wrote just 3 lines. "Tonight, the dress hangs in my closet like a ghost. Mother hasn't spoken to me all day. Not angry, just sad. Father is triumphant, already planning what connections I might make, what alliances might be formed. I keep thinking about Margaret Lawrence saying, 'At least we know what we're walking into.' I wish I knew." That afternoon, Catherine took a bath, washed her hair, let it dry in the December sunlight coming through her bedroom window. She did her makeup carefully. Not too much, just enough. Rouge on her lips, powder on her cheeks, a touch of kohl to make her gray eyes look larger. She put on the silk stockings, the shoes, the long strand of pearls her mother had insisted on buying. And then, at 8:30 in the evening, she put on the dress. She wrote one final entry before leaving her bedroom. "I look like someone else in the mirror, someone sophisticated, someone who belongs. The cream silk moves like water. The beads catch the gaslight and throw tiny rainbows across the walls. The low back makes me look older, more knowing.
I look like the kind of girl who gets invited to Helena Worthington's parties. I just hope I can remember how to be that girl for one whole night. At 8:45, Patrick brought the automobile around. James Ashworth stood at the door in his evening suit, beaming with pride and ambition. Elizabeth stood beside him, her face very pale, her hands clasped so tightly the knuckles were white. Catherine descended the stairs. Her father told her she looked beautiful. Her mother didn't say anything at all, just pulled her close, held her tight enough that Catherine could feel her trembling, and whispered in her ear, "If anything feels wrong, anything at all, you leave. You get in a taxi and you come home. I don't care about the embarrassment or what anyone thinks. You just come home to me." Catherine promised. Again. One more promise to add to all the others. At 8:50, she got into the automobile. Patrick closed the door. James Ashworth waved from the front steps like he was sending his daughter off to her coronation. And Elizabeth Ashworth stood very still in the doorway, watching the taillights disappear down East 73rd Street, her hand pressed to her mouth, knowing that she just made the worst mistake of her life. Has there ever been a moment where you knew with absolute certainty that you were making a terrible choice, but you made it anyway because the alternative seemed worse? Have you ever stood at a crossroads and picked the path that led to destruction because the other path led somewhere you couldn't bear to go? I keep thinking about Elizabeth in that doorway, about Catherine in the back of that automobile, about two women who loved each other, both making choices they'd regret, neither able to save the other.
The drive from East 73rd Street to East 67th took less than 10 minutes, but Catherine described it as feeling endless. She sat in the back of the automobile watching the city pass, the streetlights casting pools of yellow on the snow, the occasional pedestrian hurrying through the December cold, the warm glow of windows in brownstones where families were finishing dinner, listening to the radio, living ordinary lives. She wrote, "I kept thinking about those people in their ordinary houses, wondering if any of them were afraid the way I was afraid, if any of them were driving towards something they simultaneously wanted and dreaded, or if fear before important moments was just the price ambitious girls paid for trying to rise above their station." The Worthington Mansion at 24 East 67th Street was, and still is, one of the most impressive private residences in Manhattan. I've stood outside it many times while researching this story. It takes up an entire corner lot, 4 stories of limestone and marble, with windows that must be 12 feet tall on the first floor. The kind of house that makes you understand, immediately and viscerally, the difference between wealth and money. The Ashworths had money. The Worthingtons had wealth that predated the concept of money. Patrick pulled the automobile to the curb at exactly 9 o'clock. Catherine could see other cars arriving. Rolls-Royces, Packards, chauffeur-driven automobiles that cost more than houses. Young women in furs and silk were being helped out onto the sidewalk, laughing and calling to each other, their breath making clouds in the cold air. She wrote, "They all seemed to know each other, seemed comfortable, as if this was just another Saturday night, just another party, just another opportunity to see and be seen. I wanted to tell Patrick to drive away, to take me home, but then I thought about Father's face, about the disappointment, about Mother's prediction that I wasn't ready for this world. I thought about proving her wrong. So I got out of the car." The front door was opened by a butler who must have been 70 years old, the kind of servant who'd been with the family for generations, who knew all the secrets and kept all of them. He took Catherine's coat without comment, handed her a small card with a number on it, her coat check, and gestured toward the stairs that led up to the main floor. She wrote, "The entrance hall was all white marble and crystal chandeliers. A staircase curved up to the second floor, and I could hear music playing, jazz, but the refined kind, the kind wealthy people listened to when they wanted to feel modern without actually being modern. I could hear laughter, conversation, the clink of glasses. I started up the stairs. My legs felt strange, heavy, as if my body was trying to tell me something my mind refused to hear. At the top of the stairs, another servant, this one younger, a woman in a black dress with a white apron, directed Catherine to the ballroom, and when Catherine entered that room, she finally understood the full scope of what she'd walked into. The ballroom was enormous, easily 60 feet long, maybe 30 feet wide, with ceilings that soared 20 feet overhead. Crystal chandeliers, 3 of them, massive, cast light that made everything look like it was underwater, dreamy and unreal. The walls were covered in silk wallpaper, cream-colored with a sun pattern of gold. At one end, a jazz band played on a raised platform,
6 musicians, all black, all dressed in identical tuxedos, playing with the kind of precision that comes from years of practice. But what Catherine noticed most was the people. She wrote, "There were perhaps 60 guests, and I knew immediately that I was the youngest woman there. The other girls looked to be in their early 20s at most, but many were 16, 17, barely out of childhood. All of us wearing silk and pearls, all of us trying to look sophisticated. All of us, I realized with a sinking feeling, brought here for the same reason."
The men were older, mid-20s to mid-30s, wearing tuxedos that fit perfectly, smoking cigarettes in ivory holders, drinking from crystal glasses. They stood in small groups around the edges of the room, and they were watching us, evaluating, calculating, the way men look at horses before a race or paintings before an auction. I've compiled a partial guest list from society page mentions and cross-referenced diary entries from other attendees. Among the men present that night, Richard Worthington III, age 32, nephew of the hostess, educated at Oxford, rumored to have gambling debts exceeding $200,000. Theodore Cartwright III, age 29, shipping heir, whose family fortune had been devastated by the recent maritime strikes. William Van Cortlandt IV, age 35, from one of New York's oldest families, whose alcoholism was well known in society circles. Charles Pemberton Lawrence, age 28, distant cousin to Margaret Lawrence's family, whose grandfather had lost most of the family fortune in bad railroad investments. And at least 6 others, all from old families, all with names that appeared in the social register, all with the same look in their eyes that Catherine described: hungry. Among the young women, Margaret Lawrence, who Catherine had seen at Bergdorf Goodman, Sarah Rhinelander, age 17, from the banking family, 2 sisters, Emily and Charlotte Stuyvesant, ages 19 and 16, at least 20 others whose names Catherine didn't know, all from families with new fortunes in oil, steel, railroads, manufacturing. Helena Worthington stood near the fireplace at the far end of the ballroom, holding court. She was 58 but looked younger, carefully preserved, perfectly dressed in black silk with diamonds at her throat and wrists. Catherine described her as having eyes that saw everything and forgave nothing. She wrote, "Mrs. Worthington watched me enter. I felt her gaze like a physical thing, cataloging every detail, the dress, the shoes, the way I held myself. Then she smiled, and it didn't reach her eyes, and gestured for me to approach. I walked across that ballroom feeling like I was walking to my own execution. Every eye in the room turned to watch. The music kept playing, but somehow it felt like silence. When I reached Mrs. Worthington, she held out one perfectly manicured hand. I took it. Her grip was cold and firm. 'Miss Ashworth,' she said, and her voice was warm honey over ice. 'How delightful that you could join us. Your father speaks so highly of you. Thank you for inviting me, Mrs. Worthington.' 'Not at all, my dear, not at all.' She gestured to the room. 'I hope you'll find this evening educational. There are so many interesting young people here, so many opportunities for meaningful connections.'" The way she said meaningful connections made my skin crawl, but I smiled and thanked her again, and she dismissed me with a wave toward the other young women who were clustered near the windows like a flock of nervous birds in silk and pearls. Catherine joined the other girls. They made polite conversation, the weather, the music, each other's dresses. But underneath the pleasantries, Catherine could feel the tension. They were all wondering the same thing. What exactly was this party for? What was expected of them? She wrote, "Margaret Lawrence was there, and she looked at me with something that might have been pity. 'Your first Worthington gathering?' she asked. 'Yes. Then let me give you some advice.' She leaned close, her voice low enough that the others couldn't hear. 'Be polite, but not too friendly. Dance if asked, but don't let yourself be cornered alone. And whatever you do, don't drink more than 1 glass of champagne. These events have a way of getting complicated after midnight.' 'What do you mean, complicated?' But she just smiled and turned away, and I was left with more questions than answers. At 9:30, Helena Worthington called for everyone's attention. The music stopped. The conversations died. 60 people turned to face her. She stood in front of the fireplace, backlit by flames, looking like some kind of ancient priestess presiding over a ritual. And then she spoke. "My dear friends, welcome to what I hope will be a most memorable evening. You young ladies have been invited here because your families represent the new strength of America: industry, innovation, progress. You young gentlemen have been invited because your families represent the old values of America: tradition, refinement, breeding. Separately, you are impressive. Together, you could be extraordinary. This evening is an opportunity for you to meet, to converse, to discover common interests, to form connections that might, if fortune favors you, lead to more significant relationships, engagements, marriages, alliances between families that will strengthen both. I ask only that you approach this evening with open minds and generous hearts. The future of our society, our particular, precious society, depends on you young people understanding that maintaining one's position requires flexibility, pragmatism, a willingness to make advantageous choices." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Now, the band will play. There is champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Enjoy yourselves. And remember, we are among friends here. What happens in this house stays in this house. We understand each other." The music resumed. A servant appeared with a tray of champagne flutes, and the young men began to move toward the young women, like sharks that had just scented blood in the water. Catherine wrote, "I finally understood. This wasn't a party. It was an arrangement, a transaction. Helena Worthington had assembled a collection of young women from families with new money and young men from families with old names, and she expected us to pair off like animals at a breeding farm. I felt sick. I felt angry. I felt incredibly, devastatingly stupid for not understanding sooner. And I felt trapped because I was here, in this house, wearing this dress, and there was no way to leave without causing a scene, without embarrassing father, without proving mother right about everything she'd feared. So when a young man approached me, Richard Worthington III, Mrs. Worthington's nephew, with his perfectly tailored tuxedo and his calculated smile, I smiled back. And when he asked me to dance, I said yes. Because what else could I do?
Richard Worthington III was, by Catherine's description, exactly what you'd expect from someone with that name and that background. Tall, perhaps 6 feet, fair hair carefully styled, blue eyes that might have been kind if they'd reached past the calculation, educated accent with just a hint of British affectation from his years at Oxford, the kind of handsome that came from generations of careful breeding. He was also, I learned from newspaper archives and court records, deeply in debt. His father had died in 1922, leaving the family estate mortgaged to the hilt. Richard had burned through his inheritance in free years of gambling, bad investments, and expensive mistresses. By December 1925, he was facing financial ruin unless he could marry someone with money. A lot of money. Someone like Catherine Eleanor Ashworth, whose father was worth $80 million. But Catherine didn't know any of this when Richard led her onto the dance floor. She just knew that he was charming, that he danced well, that he seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say. She wrote, "We danced to Sweet Georgia Brown. The band was excellent, better than excellent actually, transcendent in that way jazz musicians sometimes are when they're playing for people who don't really appreciate them. Richard held me at the proper distance, his hand light on my back, his steps confident. 'I'm glad you came tonight,' he said. 'Helena's gatherings can be dreadfully dull, but you're interesting.' Am I? Most of these girls can barely string 3 words together. They've been trained to be decorative rather than thoughtful. But you have intelligence in your eyes. It's refreshing." I should have recognized the flattery for what it was, should have heard the practiced smoothness in his voice, but I was 19, and I'd never been called intelligent by a man who looked like Richard Worthington III, and I was stupid enough to be pleased. "What do you do?" I asked. "I mean, professionally." He laughed. "I'm a Worthington, darling. We don't do things. We are things. Ancient monuments to a dying way of life." "That sounds terribly sad." "It is. That's why evenings like this are necessary, to inject new life into old blood, fresh capital into old names. You understand, don't you?" And there it was, the real purpose, stated plainly. He was shopping for money. I was the money. I should have walked away then, should have thanked him for the dance and excused myself, but the song wasn't over.
and walking away mid-dance would have been unforgivably rude, and I'd been raised to be polite, even when politeness was dangerous. They danced 3 songs. Richard was attentive without being overwhelming, flirtatious without being crude. He asked about her interests, her reading, her thoughts on modern art. He made her laugh. He made her feel seen. It was all I understand now, completely calculated. Richard Worthington III had done this before, many times. He knew exactly how to make a young woman feel special, intelligent, valued. He knew how to lower defenses and build trust. He was a predator who'd perfected his craft over years of practice. Between dances, he introduced Catherine to other young men. Theodore Cartwright, who talked about his family's shipping business while his eyes calculated her worth. William Van Cortlandt, who was already drunk at 10 o'clock and slurred something about her being absolutely ravishing. Charles Lawrence, who asked pointed questions about her father's steel mills and whether James Ashworth was looking for investment partners. She wrote, "They were all the same, these men. Different faces, different names, but the same hunger underneath, the same desperate need for money, dressed up in breeding and manners and centuries-old names. They looked at me and saw dollar signs, salvation, a way to save their crumbling estates and maintain their positions in a world that was leaving them behind."
And I was supposed to be grateful, supposed to feel honored that these men with their fancy names and their empty bank accounts wanted to marry me. Supposed to understand that this was how society worked. Girls like me bought access with money. Boys like them sold access with names. And everyone pretended it was romance instead of commerce. At 10:30, Helena Worthington approached Catherine and Richard as they stood near the champagne table. "Richard, dear," she said, and her voice had a sharpness underneath the honey. "Perhaps you could show Miss Ashworth the conservatory. It's quite lovely this time of year. The orchids are blooming." It wasn't a suggestion. It was an instruction. Richard offered Catherine his arm. She took it, because refusing would have been rude, and they left the ballroom through a side door that led to a long hallway lined with portraits of dead Worthingtons staring down with judgmental eyes. The conservatory was at the end of the hall, a glass-walled room filled with plants and flowers that must have cost a fortune to maintain in December. It was warm, humid, smelling of earth and orchids, and something else, something sweet and slightly decaying. They were alone. Catherine wrote, "I felt the trap closing the moment Richard shut the door behind us. We were in a glass room at the end of a long hallway, far from the ballroom, far from the other guests. No one could see us. No one could hear us." "It's beautiful," I said, trying to keep my voice light, "but I should get back." "Catherine," he said my name like he owned it, took my hand before I could pull away. "I need to speak with you seriously. We barely know each other." "I know enough. I know you're intelligent, beautiful, from a family with means. I know you're wasted on the kind of men your father probably imagines you'll marry, other industrialist sons, boring businessmen with boring ambitions. Richard, I should really... I also know your father wants this. Why do you think Helena invited you tonight? Your father approached her 6 months ago, asking to be considered for this gathering. He understands how the world works. He wants you to marry well, to marry up." The air felt too thick, too hot. I couldn't breathe properly. "You're saying my father sold me?" "I'm saying your father made an investment. He built a fortune in steel. Now he wants to trade that fortune for something that can't be bought. A name, a position, acceptance into society that will never truly welcome him, but might welcome his grandchildren if they have the right last name." He was still holding my hand. His grip had gotten tighter. "And you?" I said quietly. "What are you trading?" He had the grace to look almost embarrassed. "My family has a name that goes back 4 centuries, property in Manhattan that's worth millions, connections throughout American and European society. But we also have debts, mortgages, obligations that need substantial capital to resolve.
How substantial? $300,000, roughly. In today's money, that's approximately $5 million. The price of his pride, the cost of maintaining his position, the amount my father was worth to him.
And if I don't agree to be part of this transaction? His hand tightened more. It hurt now. I tried to pull away. He didn't let go. Catherine, don't be naive. You're here because your father wants you here, because he's made arrangements, agreements. Your refusal would embarrass him, damage his reputation, destroy the relationships he spent 5 years building. Is that what you want? Let go of my hand. Not until you agree to let me call on you, to give this a chance. We could be good together. You're clever enough to make it work. Richard, let go. He didn't. And I realized in that moment that no one was coming to help me, that this room, this situation, this trap, it was all designed exactly as intended, that Helena Worthington had sent me here knowing this would happen, that my father had agreed to it, that everyone involved had conspired to put me alone in a room with a desperate man who needed my money badly enough to take it by any means necessary. I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed. The scream brought someone, Thomas, the old butler who'd taken Catherine's coat. He appeared in the doorway of the conservatory with the measured speed of someone who dealt with many delicate situations in his years of service. "Is everything quite all right?" he asked, his voice neutral. Richard dropped Catherine's hand immediately, stepped back, arranged his face into polite concern. Miss Ashworth felt faint. The heat in here. I was just helping her to a chair. Indeed, perhaps Miss Ashworth would like some air. The terrace is quite cool this evening. It was a rescue. Subtle, deniable, but definite. Thomas was giving Catherine an escape route. She wrote, "I followed Thomas out of the conservatory, down the hallway, back toward the ballroom. My hand was throbbing where Richard had gripped it. I could feel tears wanting to come, but I wouldn't let them. Not here, not where people could see." "Miss," Thomas said quietly as we walked, "if I may be so bold, there is a servant's entrance that leads directly to the street, should you wish to depart without formalities. Could I use a telephone first?" "Of course. This way." He led me to a small office off the main hall, left me alone with the telephone. I called home. Mother answered on the second ring, as if she'd been waiting by the phone. "Kathy? Mother? I want to come home." "I'll send Patrick immediately. Go to the servant's entrance. Don't say goodbye to anyone. Just leave." "Mother, you were right about everything. I'm so sorry." "Don't apologize. Just come home, sweetheart. Just come home to me." I hung up, found Thomas waiting in the hallway. He led me through the back passages of the house, the parts where servants moved unseen, maintaining the illusion of effortless wealth. We emerged into a small courtyard behind the mansion, where delivery trucks unloaded groceries and coal. It was snowing again, light flakes drifting down through the darkness. I stood in that courtyard in my $350 dress, shivering, waiting for Patrick to arrive, thinking about how close I'd come to something terrible. But I'd escaped. I was safe. I was going home. That's what I thought, standing in that snowy courtyard at 11 o'clock on December 5th, 1925. I was wrong.
Patrick arrived at 11:15 p.m. Catherine got into the automobile, gave him the address on East 73rd Street, and sat back against the leather seats, trying to stop shaking. She was cold. She'd left her coat in the front hall and wasn't about to go back for it. But more than cold, she was shocked, angry, betrayed. She wrote, "I kept thinking about Father, about how he must have known, must have arranged this. 6 months ago," Richard said. "My father had approached Helena Worthington 6 months ago, while I was still reading novels in the morning room, still believing we were slowly being accepted because of Father's success and Mother's grace. He was negotiating to sell me to the highest bidder." I felt sick. I felt stupid. But more than anything, I felt relieved. I'd escaped.
I'd gotten out before anything worse could happen. And now I'd go home, tell Mother everything, and we'd figure out how to deal with Father together. The drive should have taken 10 minutes, but as they turned onto Fifth Avenue, heading north, Patrick spoke for the first time. "Miss Catherine," he said, "I've been instructed to take a different route. Your father is waiting for you at the University Club." Catherine's blood went cold. "Patrick, take me home now." "I'm sorry, miss. Your father was very clear. He's waiting for you." "Patrick, I don't care what my father—" "Miss Catherine," his voice was gentle but firm, "I have a family. I need this job. Please don't make me choose between you and my employment." So Catherine sat in silence as Patrick drove, not home, to the University Club on West 54th Street, a men's club where her father was a member, where deals were made over brandy and cigars, where women were only admitted under strict supervision. James Ashworth was waiting in a private reception room. He was still in his evening clothes, but his bow tie was loose and he smelled of whiskey. Standing beside him was Helena Worthington. She wrote, "I knew the moment I saw them together that this had all been planned. Every detail, every moment, from the invitation to the party, to Richard's proposal, to my escape, all of it choreographed." "Sit down, Catherine," Father said. "I want to go home." "Sit down." I'd never heard that tone from him before, cold, absolute, the voice of a man who'd built an empire and wasn't used to being disobeyed. I sat. Mrs. Worthington smiled at me. It was the smile of a python that had just successfully cornered its prey. "Your father and I have been discussing your abrupt departure from my home this evening," she said. "Most unfortunate, most embarrassing." Richard was quite distressed. "Richard assaulted me." "Don't be dramatic," Father snapped. "He made you a proposal, a generous one, and you responded by screaming like a common—" "He hurt me. Look." I held out my hand. There were bruises already forming where Richard had gripped my wrist, purple black marks in the shape of fingers. Father barely glanced at them. "Catherine, I have invested 5 years and considerable capital into establishing our family in society. Tonight was the culmination of that investment. Helena has been kind enough to facilitate introductions between our family and families of substance and physician. Your behavior tonight has jeopardized everything I've worked for." "You sold me," I said quietly, "like merchandise." "I secured your future. Do you think you can do better than Richard Worthington III? Do you think men of his caliber grow on trees? He's willing to overlook your family's background, your mother's origins, your complete lack of social standing. He's willing to overlook it for $300,000. Silence, long and awful. Then Father said, $300,000 is a reasonable price for a Worthington marriage. And I understood, truly understood. I wasn't his daughter in this moment. I was inventory, a business asset. $300,000 worth of merchandise in a cream silk dress.
Helena Worthington leaned forward, her voice soothing now, reasonable. "My dear child, you're young. You don't understand how the world works. These arrangements are normal, expected. Your mother married your father for similar reasons. He offered her escape from poverty. She offered him, well, companionship. This is simply the same transaction at a higher level. Richard is from one of America's finest families. Your children would be Worthingtons. Your daughters would be invited to every ball. Your sons would attend the best schools. No one would ever question your family's place in society. Isn't that what you wanted? What you've always wanted?" "Not like this," I whispered. "Then how, exactly?" Helena's voice sharpened. "Did you think they'd simply accept you because you're pretty and well-read? Did you think your father's money alone would be enough?
Money is common, dear. Money is everywhere. But position, that must be bought with daughters. Catherine tried to stand. Her father pushed her back down into the chair. You will return to my home next Saturday, Helena said. There will be a small dinner party. Richard will be there. You will apologize for your behavior tonight. You will give him the opportunity to continue his courtship, and you will be grateful for the chance. No! Father slapped me. Not hard. He'd never hit me before and didn't quite know how, but hard enough to snap my head to the side, to make my eyes water, to let me know that I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. You will do as you're told, he said. I've spent too much, worked too hard, planned too carefully to have you destroy everything because you've developed foolish ideas about romance. You're 19 years old. You'll marry Richard Worthington or someone like him and you'll be grateful. And that's the end of this discussion. And if I refuse? He looked at me like I was a stranger, like I was a business problem that needed to be solved. Then you'll find yourself without a home, without resources, and without family. I'll disinherit you. Your mother won't protect you. She has no legal standing, no money of her own. You'll be a girl from nowhere with nothing, and let's see how many proposals you receive then. Mother would never. Your mother will do what I tell her, as will you. I found the records of what happened next in multiple sources. The university club keeps visitor logs. There's a newspaper mention, and Catherine herself recorded it in painful detail. Elizabeth Ashworth, wearing her nightgown under a heavy coat, appeared in the university club at 11:45 p.m. She'd taken a taxi, had probably never hailed a taxi alone in her life, and demanded to see her husband. The club staff tried to stop her. Women weren't allowed, but she pushed past them, found the private reception room, and entered without knocking. Catherine wrote. Mother looked like an avenging angel. Her hair was loose, her face was flushed, and she was shaking with a rage I'd never seen in her. She took one look at my face, at the red mark from Father's slap, and something in her broke. Get away from her, she said to Father. Her voice was deadly quiet. Get away from my daughter. Elizabeth, go home. You're embarrassing. I said get away from her. Mother crossed the room, pulled me to my feet, held me against her. I could feel her heart pounding. Patrick called me, told me you'd intercepted Catherine, told me what you were planning. Father's face went dark. Patrick is fired.
Patrick saved your daughter from making the biggest mistake of her life. Or rather, from being forced into the biggest mistake of her life. Helena Worthington stood. Mrs. Ashworth, I understand this is emotional, but you understand nothing. Mother turned on her, and I saw Helena actually take a step back. You sit in your mansion, built on your great-grandfather's money, playing God with young people's lives, arranging marriages like they're business mergers, and you call it civilization. You call it society. But I know what it is. It's evil. It's buying and selling human beings and pretending it's respectable because you do it with champagne instead of chains. Mrs. Ashworth, my daughter is not for sale. Not for $300,000, not for a Worthington name, not for a place in your horrible world where children are merchandise and love is a weakness. Father moved toward Mother, and for a moment I thought he was going to hit her too. But Mother didn't flinch, didn't back down, just stood there, holding me, protecting me, the way she'd wanted to protect me all along. If you touch either of us, Mother said quietly, I will go to every newspaper in New York and tell them exactly what happened here tonight. I'll tell them about Helena Worthington's marriage market, about desperate aristocrats shopping for heiresses, about fathers selling their daughters. I'll destroy you, James. I'll destroy everything you've built. You wouldn't dare. You have nothing. No money, no connections. I have the truth, and I'm not afraid to use it anymore. The standoff lasted maybe 30 seconds, but in Catherine's telling, it felt eternal. Father and Mother staring at each other across a gulf that had probably always existed, but was only now visible. James Ashworth, the ambitious industrialist who'd left his humanity behind somewhere in the Pennsylvania coal mines.
Elizabeth Ashworth, the seamstress's daughter, who'd married for love and watched it curdle into something unrecognizable. Finally, Father spoke. "Get out, both of you. You have until tomorrow to collect your things. Then I want you out of my house." "Gladly," Mother said. She kept her arm around me, guided me toward the door, paused in the doorway and looked back at Helena Worthington, who was watching with calculating eyes. "You should be ashamed of yourself," Mother said. "You're a monster in pearls." Helena smiled. "My dear Mrs. Ashworth, in our world, there's no difference." Catherine and Elizabeth left the university club together, found a taxi, went home. They spent the night packing what they could carry: clothes, jewelry, Catherine's books, Elizabeth's journals. At dawn, they left the limestone mansion on East 73rd Street and never went back. Catherine wrote, "We took a room at a boarding house on East 23rd Street. 2 beds, a shared bathroom down the hall, walls so thin we could hear everything happening in the neighboring rooms. It cost $3 a week, more than Mother used to make in a month of sewing, but all we could afford with the little money Mother had hidden away over the years. We had nothing, no home, no income, no prospects. Father made good on his threat, disinherited me completely, told anyone who asked that I'd suffered a nervous breakdown and was being treated abroad. But we were free, and we were together. And that first morning, lying in a narrow bed in a cheap boarding house, I felt safer than I'd felt in months."
The next weeks are documented in scattered diary entries. Catherine and Elizabeth trying to build a new life from nothing. Elizabeth going back to sewing, taking in work from women who remembered her skills and didn't care about her scandal. Catherine trying to find employment, difficult for a 19-year-old woman with no work experience and a scandal attached to her name. Money was desperately tight. Some days they ate once. Most days, Catherine wrote, they were cold because they couldn't afford enough coal for the stove. But there's also joy in these entries, freedom, relief, the discovery that poverty chosen is different from poverty imposed. She wrote on December 20th, "Mother laughed today, really laughed, the kind that makes your stomach hurt. We were trying to cook dinner on our little stove, and I burned the potatoes so badly they were basically coal, and she laughed until she cried. I realized I hadn't heard her laugh like that in years, maybe since before Father got rich. Maybe being poor but free is better than being rich but sold." I wish the story ended there, with Catherine and Elizabeth poor but together, struggling but happy, building a new life outside the world that had tried to destroy them. But it doesn't end there. On December 28th, Catherine wrote, "Mother's been coughing. She says it's nothing, just a cold from the damp in our room. But I hear her at night, coughing so hard she can barely breathe. I wanted to call a doctor, but we can't afford one. She said not to worry, said she's survived worse." January 2nd, 1926. Mother collapsed today while sewing. I found her on the floor, unconscious, barely breathing. Mrs. Chen from downstairs helped me get her to the hospital. They said it's pneumonia. They said she waited too long to come in. They said she's very sick. January 8th. The hospital bills are more than we can pay. I wrote to Father, begging him to help, told him Mother was dying. He hasn't responded. January 15th. Mother is worse. She keeps apologizing, says this is her fault, so she should have been stronger, should have stood up to Father sooner, should have gotten us out before that night. I told her she saved me. She gave me the only thing that matters. She showed me what real love looks like. Not the kind that treats people like investments. The kind that sacrifices everything. January 25th. I sold Mother's wedding ring today. The one Father gave her when they married. Gold with a small diamond. I got $85 for it. It's not enough for the medical bills, but it's something. Mother cried when I told her. Said that ring was the only piece of him she'd wanted to keep. The him from before. The him who loved her. I told her that man died a long time ago. February 15th. The hospital called. They said if we can't pay by the end of the month, they'll have to discharge Mother. She's still too sick to leave. She'll die if they send her home. I don't know what to do. The final entry in Catherine's diary was dated March 2nd, 1926. The handwriting was barely legible, written fast, written through tears. Mother died this morning at 6:23 a.m. I was holding her hand. She opened her eyes at the end, looked at me, and whispered, "I'm sorry I said yes." Then she was gone. The doctor said it was heart failure, but I know what really killed her. It was grief. It was guilt. It was the weight of trying to protect me and failing. It was loving someone too much in a world that punishes love and rewards calculation. Father didn't come to the funeral. I didn't expect him to, but I hoped. Even after everything, I hoped he might remember he once loved her, that she gave him everything, that she died because she chose to save me instead of appeasing him. I buried her in a public cemetery in Queens. No headstone. I couldn't afford one. Just a grave marked with a wooden cross and her name, Elizabeth Ashworth, born 1883, died 1926, beloved mother. I wanted to write more, wanted to say she was brave, brilliant, beautiful, that she saw through the lies of high society, that she loved me enough to lose everything. But I had 50 cents left, and the gravediggers wanted their money, so I just wrote her name and walked away. This is the last entry I'll write in this diary. Tomorrow I'm leaving New York, going somewhere else, somewhere no one knows the name Ashworth or Worthington, or cares about marriages and money and maintaining position. If anyone ever reads this, know this: my mother was worth 1,000 Helena Worthingtons. She was real in a world of performances. She loved truly in a place where love was a commodity, and she died protecting me from the same fate she'd been trapped in. I hope I can be half as brave as she was. I hope her death meant something. Mother knew. That's what I wrote on December 6th. Mother knew that party would destroy me, knew Father was selling me, knew the price of admission to that world was my soul. And she died getting me out. I just wish I'd listened to her from the start.
The diary ended there, but my research didn't. I tracked Catherine Eleanor Ashworth through census records, employment records, and a few scattered mentions in newspaper archives. She left New York in March 1926, right after her mother's funeral. Went to Chicago, then Denver, then Los Angeles. Worked as a seamstress, like her mother. Never married. Never went back to New York. She died in 1974, at age 68, in a small apartment in Pasadena, alone. The obituary was 4 lines long, mentioned no surviving family. No one came to her funeral except a neighbor who'd been asked to handle the arrangements. And when that neighbor cleaned out Catherine's apartment, she found boxes of journals, photographs, newspaper clippings, and one leather-bound diary dated 1925. She sold them all to an estate auction house, and 90 years later, I bought them for $12. James Ashworth died in 1932. His obituary in the New York Times ran on the front page, called him a titan of industry, said he was survived by no immediate family. His fortune was divided among various charities. The limestone mansion on East 73rd Street was sold to pay debts. Helena Worthington lived until 1941. She continued hosting her parties, arranging her marriages, maintaining her position right up until the end. Her obituary praised her as a pillar of New York society. No mention of the marriage markets. No mention of the young women used as currency. Richard Worthington III married in 1927, a steel heiress from Pittsburgh whose father paid off his debts. The marriage lasted 15 years before ending in a scandalous divorce. Richard died in 1952, bankrupt again, having burned through 2 fortunes in his lifetime. Margaret Lawrence married Theodore Cartwright III and had 4 children. By all accounts, it was a successful marriage, or at least a stable one. She died in 1982, leaving behind a legacy of charitable work and society columns. The Worthington Mansion still stands at 24 East 67th Street.
It's been converted into apartments now, like Catherine's childhood home. Sometimes I walk past it, look up at those windows, and think about what happened behind them on December 5th, 1925. The building tells you nothing. Stone and glass and carefully maintained facades. But if you knew where to look, if you had Catherine's diary and Elizabeth's courage and the patience to piece together 90-year-old scandals, you'd see the truth underneath. You'd see the marriage market that operated for generations under the veneer of civilization. You'd see the young women treated as merchandise, their lives bartered and sold. You'd see the desperate aristocrats clinging to their names while auctioning off their dignity. You'd see fathers who loved status more than daughters, mothers who knew the truth but lacked the power to stop it. And you'd see one young woman who walked into that world with hope and walked out with nothing but the clothes on her back, and a mother who loved her enough to sacrifice everything.
I've spent 3 months with Catherine's diary, reading her words, researching her life, trying to understand how a 19-year-old girl's desire to belong led to such devastation. And I keep coming back to that moment in the university club when Elizabeth Ashworth stood between her daughter and a world determined to consume her. When she chose poverty over compliance. When she said no to a man who held all the power and yes to a daughter who had none. Elizabeth Ashworth died at 42 years old in a charity hospital bed, penniless, her only child watching helplessly beside her. The world forgot her immediately. No society page obituary, no memorial service at Trinity Church, just a wooden cross in Queens that probably rotted away decades ago. But she won. That's what strikes me most forcefully as I close Catherine's diary and return it to its box. Elizabeth won. Not in the way the world measures victory. She died poor, her husband abandoned her, her life ended in a charity ward. But she saved her daughter from being sold. She showed Catherine what real love looked like. She drew a line and said, "This far, no further." And Catherine, because of her mother's sacrifice, got to live a life of her own choosing. Poor, obscure, forgotten, but free. She worked as a seamstress like her mother, never married the Richard Worthingtons of the world, never attended another society party, never compromised her dignity for a name or position. She lived on her own terms, which in 1926, for a woman of her background, was itself a revolutionary act. I think about these two women often now, Elizabeth and Catherine Ashworth, the mother who fought and the daughter who survived. The two people who looked at the glittering world of the Golden Age and saw it for what it really was, a beautiful prison where love was a commodity and daughters were currency. Their story isn't unique. There were thousands of young women at thousands of parties in those years being evaluated and auctioned off. Most of them went through with the marriages. Most of them smiled in the society page photographs and gave birth to children who carried the right names and never spoke about the price their mothers paid. But some, like Catherine, escaped. Some, like Elizabeth, fought back. And some stories, like this one, survive in dusty boxes at estate auctions, waiting for someone to find them and tell the truth. Catherine Eleanor Ashworth wanted you to know what happened at Helena Worthington's party on December 5th, 1925. She wrote it all down, preserved it, kept it safe, even when she had nothing else, because she understood that silence protects the guilty and erases the victims. So I'm telling her story. I'm sharing her words. I'm making sure that 90 years later, someone remembers the girl in the cream silk dress who said no, and the mother who loved her enough to lose everything. This was the last party Catherine should have gone to, the invitation she should have refused, the permission her mother should have denied. But it was also the night she learned what she was worth, not in dollars or names or social position, but in the ferocity of a mother's love and the courage to walk away from everything the world said she should want. And maybe, in the end, that knowledge was worth the price they paid.
If this story moved you, please leave a like. It helps others find these forgotten tales from the shadows of America's most glittering era. Subscribe to Golden Age Mysteries for more stories that history tried to erase, voices that deserved to be heard, truths that were buried in mansions and boardrooms and society pages. And tell me, what haunts you most about Catherine's story? The mother's sacrifice? The father's betrayal? The casual cruelty of a system that treated human beings as merchandise? Or maybe it's the realization that this happened everywhere, to thousands of women, and most of their stories were never written down, never preserved, never told. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I keep searching for more boxes at estate auctions, more diaries in attics, more voices that refuse to stay silent even 90 years later. Thank you for listening to Catherine Eleanor Ashworth's story. Thank you for remembering Elizabeth. Thank you for bearing witness to what happened behind the closed doors of the Golden Age. Their story is over, but your part isn't. By listening, by remembering, by refusing to let their sacrifice be forgotten, you're giving them something they never had in life. You're giving them justice.